This video is sponsored by Lenovo. We took on the task of building this insane throne, but this isn't any ordinary throne. This throne was built out of the bodies of defeated video game bosses. The task was simple, but not easy. Build a throne that can support the weight of a person. Now, this doesn't sound too bad, right? We didn't have any idea what we were in for.
I'm cooked. He's gonna kill me.
Initially, the build plan started out pretty straightforward. I used the 3D animation models of the Lenovo Legion characters in order to start developing a sort of concept of what the throne would look like. From here, I was going to break each part into sections that could be modular for transportation, as well as build support inside of the prints to hold the weight. The throne was made from 6 different Lenovo characters: the final boss, the mech boss, the cute boss, the apocalyptic boss, the horror boss, and the skeleton boss. This all sounded fine and good until it got to the slicing portion. This throne was massive. I actually started to panic a little bit when I saw how big the 3D files were in the slicer program. This turned out to be a blessing in disguise though, as I quickly started to realize that this initial plan was extremely flawed. There was absolutely no way we would be able to build a throne strong enough using 3D printing. So, we became woodworkers. Nick actually worked in a woodshop for a bit, and we both had gone to school for film, so we had prior knowledge on set building, working with wood, etc. So I sent over my concept file to him, and he did a ton of research on how to make a structure solid and strong enough to hold a minimum of 400 pounds. What we ended up with was an extremely strong structure, say that 5 times, made from plywood and 2x4s, utilizing furniture latches to connect everything together and furniture levelers to make sure everything sat as flat and sturdy as possible. Tell us about what's going on here.
Alright, so here's the hand that sits on top of that. Here's the front body framing. This is what the outer kind of shell will look like. And we're gonna start on the framing here. These are all 2x4s that we're using. This is supported by the beams that are underneath it. And then you have another 2x4 to the left of it that bolts into this to make it stronger. And it also bolts into the horizontal. So everything is kind of supported by verticals underneath it so that it can support the weight of the hand on top as well as like a person.
That's like 600 pounds.
Yes.
Just in case, because this will be like, this is going to be used by, what did he say, like 15,000 people potentially?
Yeah.
We want it to last.
Any people who do wood design, do not come after us because we did this all in Blender.
This is very amateur, but we'll make it work.
Everything is approximate, and we may have used a foam template program to unfold to get our shells. So
we're not accounting for like wood thickness or anything. It's literally just we're winging it.
It'll all be like done by hand.
Yeah.
So we'll take away the thickness of the wood by hand.
With the rough Blender model in hand, we took measurements of all the cuts needed for the understructure and got to work. We kind of worked in an assembly line with Nick cutting 2x4s and me gluing and screwing the pieces together. With the understructure built, we then had to start cutting the big plywood sheets that would cover the faces of each modular part. In the background of all this, I started running all the 3D prints for the parts we could actually print. Oh my god, he's actually heavy. Oh my god. This included the shoulder spike, the giant final boss head, some detail pieces for the jetpack and the cage, the skeleton parts, and the giant robot head. And suddenly, we became master multitaskers. We had to learn to divide and conquer fast. Nick started cutting plywood panels to cut our 2x4 frame for the main structure. And while he worked on some of those other pieces, I started hand sculpting some of the other elements of the throne. I started with the giant sword that the final boss had, and I cut it out of multiple sheets of pink foam. He's missing this part. After carving these down to the right size and shape, I coated it with a mix of PVA glue and joint compound to make it more rigid, and then I went back over that with just plain joint compound to add texture. When this was done, a coat of Plasti-Dip was then added to seal it and act as a base coat.
It's massive.
Once the sword was built and waiting for the paint stage, we moved on to the cage for the cute boss. We cut dowel rods to size along with more plywood sheets to create the main structure. Once everything was built, I coated it in joint compound to get rid of the wood grain texture, sanded it smooth, and gave it a base coat of paint. It's like hot glue where it's like you rub it into your hands long enough and then you can just kind of, it moisturizes your skin. I also built this cute little working door with a little bite mark out of it, like he got hungry. We then shifted gears to working on the structure of the giant hand seat. These are phalange slots. Nick made templates that we cut out of, surprise, more plywood. The top was a little tight at first, but eventually we got it with a little convincing.
Oh Lord.
Once the frame was built and together, we wrote little notes before we sealed it up. We used bendy ply to close up the rounded face of the wrist, which took a little longer than it should have.
Oh, with the staples?
Oh, because I went with this line.
No, the staple line is probably more accurate. Is it not?
No.
Oh.
While Nick finished up some details on the seat, I switched over to working on the horror boss head and the jetpack. The horror boss head was made from a flower pot that I printed details for and attached to the surface, and then applied a textured metallic base coat to. The jetpack was just as simple. So for the jetpack pieces, we're using concrete pour tubes and then 3D printing parts attached to it just to save time and filament, so you don't need to print this. Yeah, it also looks like a screen tube, like Monsters Inc. Once I was done with those smaller parts, both Nick and I focused on sculpting the giant fingers on the seat. These were cut out of pink foam and sandwiched together around the 2x4 structure. We attached these to the finger understructure using a construction adhesive and hot glue. I also began attaching detailed trims and panels to the wooden base of the structure. Once the fingers were built, Nick began cutting the side and back details of the throne base while I sanded the pink foam structure smooth. Which took a while.
Many hours later.
A layer of joint compound went over this as well to harden the pink foam a bit more and fill any large gaps in texture. At this point of the build, things got super panicky and we were literally working on 3 to 4 things at a time. I started welding prints together so we could start sanding and painting them, while Nick was applying Bondo, wood filler, and filler primer to other prints. And while this stuff dried, I tackled one of the hardest aspects of this build. The animatronic. Alright, so newest challenge is the animatronic. Now, this was an interesting thing to design because basically he needs to go from cute to like a demon. So the way that I did this was that I basically built his teeth in and I slit his mouth all the way through so he can start really cute and cuddly, and then his mouth opens and reveals his fangs. Now I'm gonna have a tongue that is basically hinged so it pops down once the jaw opens, This whole thing will be set on about 3 servos, so he gets some neck movement, but he'll kind of pull his head back and his mouth will open. For his eyes, they basically need to switch between the cute normal eyeballs and like a demon eye. And so what I'm doing is I hook these screens up to an Adafruit Feather M4 Express. These screens will have like amplifiers in front of them that make them look like eyeballs. They're like these little plastic magnifying lenses. So last but not least, once he's painted the correct colors, which is like this dark blue and then some green and purple accents, we're gonna cover him in flocking. Now this is what I did with my newest Pikachu. It's basically like short pieces of fur that you electrostatically charge by hooking up the receiver with like a ground. And it's like a little, like a shaky thing. You fill it with the fur and you shake it above it when it's electrostatically charged, and it sticks up and creates like a really nice fur texture. I gave the plastic body a base coat of color for each section, since you can see the color of the skin under the flocking you add. The tongue was on a hinge so that it flipped down when the mouth opened, and once this was done, the eyes were programmed.
Bleh.
Then I glued his eyes into his head, which was a super difficult process that I didn't get on video because literally all of our hands were inside of this robot. Then quickly before we put anything else inside of the body, we mapped out where the bolts in his feet would go and aligned into the cage for easy removal.
He's speechless.
His jaw's on the floor. Then I hooked up my final servo design into the robot, and I realized I wasn't too happy with the animation. Originally, his mouth opened too slowly, which I fixed so then it hid the gap under his chin more. Then we got to the flocking portion of this absolute beast. I broke the rules a bit and I did each color separately, so I started with blue and I covered the areas with PVA glue. I then attached the ground wire of the flocking gun to the robot and I gave him some nice fur. After letting that dry for around 6 to 8 hours, I did the exact same thing with the green, and then I let him sit overnight to set up and fully dry. The next day, we started tying up some loose ends and preparing for paint, since we only had a few days left. Nick sculpted the entire final boss arm, which was made from hand sculpting pink foam and EVA foam armor parts, while I finished sanding joint compound off of the wooden base.
Yep.
And then the absolutely best part, the most fun part of all, painting. Yippee! There is nothing more fun than battle damage and weathering, but first I had to coat the entire thing in latex paint. That's right, we used house paint and rollers to cover this, since spray paint would be super inefficient and horribly expensive. Nick worked on weathering smaller pieces like the prosthetic arm piece, and still shaded the skull parts for a more worn look. After all, these were defeated bosses. We printed a hexagon template that I then used to airbrush a texture onto the graded steps. We wanted these pieces to look less boxy and have more depth to them. This is a giant robot after all. I then used various techniques to weather all of these parts. I used dry brushing to add scrapes and scratches, oxidation to the copper horror boss helmet for depth, brown stippled for rust effects, and my favorite of all, airbrushing to kind of fake depth and create shading around the entire throne. I cut some stencils with my Cricut as well in order to create the Lenovo logos, and we also put our handles on the thumb. Once everything had a good solid coat of weathering applied and the proper shading and color layering was done on each piece, we finished this beast of a build at 1 AM the night before we had to send it out. And I'll let it speak for itself. Huge thank you to Lenovo Legion for trusting us with like such a huge build at PAX East. I'm really proud of how this came out, and I think everybody else is too. And before I leave, I've got one more thing left to leave with you.
Your head is still cut off, but there you go.